Tell us about Joseph Gingold. You came to him as a boy. He was a pupil of Eugène Ysaye and was concertmaster of the Cleveland Orchestra under George Szell. What was his influence on you, on your life, on your music?
Well, Gingold it's my connection with Gingold goes back actually even to the time I think I played for him when I was 6 years old. My teacher at the time knew him a little bit. I grew up in the town where Joseph Gingold was teaching in Bloomington, Indiana. So he was a teacher at the Indiana University School of Music, which is it is probably the largest music school in the world and had some of the greatest teachers in the world. But this, my parents didn't know when they moved to Bloomington when I was born. Just around the time I was born, they loved music, but they thought they were moving to the middle of nowhere because of my father's job at the university, in the middle of nowhere culturally. But as it turns out, there's this incredible music school. So I grew up down the street from Joseph Gingold, student of Ysaye and a man who played under Toscanini and George Szell. I mean, it's pretty lucky for me just geographically. And so I actually played for him when I was very young, and then later on when I was 12 years old, I met him. Funny enough, not even in Bloomington, but at a summer camp where Galamian taught. It's called Meadowmount, and Gingold taught there, and he remembered me from Indiana, but we sort of came into contact there, and he coached me. And after that, I was so inspired. I asked my parents. I didn't ask him myself. I was very shy, but my parents asked him, "Please teach our son." And from then on became like a grandfather to me in so many ways. And incredible. His stories, Gingold's stories, from the time he played under Toscanini with the NBC Symphony and led the Cleveland Orchestra. He knew Jascha Heifetz and Fritz Kreisler and all the greats, and would tell me stories all day long about these guys.
How often did you see Gingold for lessons? And did these feel like they were a certain sense of pressure?
You know, I started seeing Gingold as a teacher when I was 12. He was 70 and I was 12. So you know, I was in middle school, and yet I was sort of a special student at the university. But it was a connection that I would see him at the end of the day on Fridays, at the end of the day, end of his day after he taught all his college students, and it was open-ended. So we'd sometimes be 2-3 hours lessons where I'd play for him, he would play. I mean, the most beautiful sound of any violinist to this day that I've heard. The sweetest Stradivarius that he had, but also just his very old-fashioned playing, like from another era, and that's what I have in my ear from him. But we would play. He'd go into his library and take out string quartets, and we'd read through things. It was very open, kind of open-ended. It was not structured. He was never mean ever. Never kind of got on me. Everything he did was through positive encouragement, and I think that worked for me. It certainly kept me interested, and I wanted to please him.
At what point did you realize that your career was starting to take off? Did you feel emotionally ready for your early successes?
You know, the career. The word career, I never thought in terms of a career. I started getting paid at some point along the line, and I was able to buy my first sports car when I turned 16. I bought it myself, you know, with my own money, because I'd been getting paid a little bit here and there from, at that point, competitions, the few that I did, and then a few concerts I would. And then that sort of snowballed eventually into a career. But frankly, I never thought in those terms. I still don't think of music as a career. It's just because it's so much more than that. It's a way of living. It's all encompassing. And so it kind of happened gradually. It was not an overnight thing. I didn't win a international competition, suddenly thrust on the scene. Gingold, my teacher, just encouraged me to play as much as I could. Little concerts here and there. Nothing was too unimportant to play to play in front of people for. And I just gained experience, and things sort of evolved into my concert career today. But
there was a story, I believe, at your Philadelphia orchestra debut at 14. I believe at this occasion, the story goes that your shoulder rest fell to the ground, and at some point, cool as a cucumber, before the cadenza, you picked it up, and then without missing a note, you continued. Were you always that comfortable on stage?
Well, there's two aspects. First, there's a story. What actually happened was that I had this shoulder rest that was held together by a rubber band, and it came off just before the cadenza. And actually, I might have been cool as a cucumber, but when I was stretching it to put it back on my violin, I actually accidentally let go of it, and it hit the principal violist in the head. So the rubber band went and shot, and I played the cadenza without a shoulder rest, and the Philadelphia Orchestra, probably laughing all the way through it, they passed this thing around up to the concertmaster, and at the end of the first movement, they gave it to me, and I put it back on. So that was my debut with the Philadelphia Orchestra. I didn't take his eye out, but it could have been disastrous. But as far as feeling comfortable on stage, yeah, it's funny because I mentioned that I was a shy kid in a lot of ways. I'm quite shy as a kid. I've sort of grown out of that, but not on stage. I was never shy on stage. I guess this is a common story you hear from actors who, you think seem so outgoing, and they claim that they're very shy people. In a way, music is like acting. You can become something else, and for a shy person like myself, I felt very comfortable when I was playing music and getting up on stage. Nowhere else was I so comfortable.
Did you feel like you had space for yourself to take artistic risks in the beginning? Did you fear certain failure, or were you just doing your own thing and not worried about the result?
I in a way, I think I was kind of fearless a little bit. If you can be a little bit fearless, probably that's partially the encouragement of and the way I was brought up with my teachers. I was always encouraged to take risks, and Gingold would smile when I would try something new, and I never felt like I was controlled. You got to do it this way. He allowed me as a teacher, which is I think very important. He allowed me to be myself and to come up with answers by myself.
Yes.
He would pose the questions, I think, like all great teachers do. It's posing the right questions for you to figure out on your own, rather than telling you, play it this way, play it this way. No, take time here, put your finger here, use this fingering. I mean, there were other teachers that was around at summer camps and things, that would basically hand out to all their students their fingerings for a piece, and all the students would diligently copy every little number so that everybody would play it the same way. And Gingold was never like that. He would say, because how you choose to play it, which fingering you use on your instrument, that reflects how you feel about the piece. And if you do it exactly like everyone else, that's sort of locking you into a certain way of thinking. He guided me, of course, and sometimes would say, "Are you sure you want to do that?" And sometimes he said, "Love that. I totally buy that." And it kind of instilled a confidence in myself that I could come up with the answers, and maybe that's why I felt sort of the freedom to take risks. And to this day, I feel like that I enjoy the feeling of being on stage and taking risks, doing something different, even just going and trying something new in the middle of, in front of an audience. And I think it's important. I think in performance that the audience doesn't feel like they're witnessing something that this person has spent a zillion hours practicing, that it should feel almost like an improvisational. And even if you have practiced a million hours and know exactly what you want to do, it should seem like you're telling the story for the first time.
Both of your parents were psychologists. Did a certain awareness of psychology affect your relationship with the stage?
I don't know about because my parents were both in the field of psychology, and I don't know if exactly that trained me for the amount of psychology that one does need to understand in our business. In the music business, psychology is very important in a lot of ways. I think understanding other people that you're working with, but also oneself. I don't know if about my parents, but certainly I'm still ongoing trying to understand myself, and the psychology of how my brain works. Because when you're on stage and you're trying to do something, you're basically trying to master how your brain works in so many ways. Nerves, for instance. One day you play something perfectly 10 times in a row, and then and all of a sudden on stage suddenly you're getting a mental block you can't remember something, or it doesn't work right. At that point you have to really understand your own brain. How do you work around that? How do you change it up? All these things? I feel like I'm still trying to figure out how my brain works in that way.
It was Michael Jordan who actually said that he succeeded precisely because he failed so many times. Were there certain setbacks along the way that in fact made you stronger?
Certainly. I mean, there were, I guess, I don't dwell on setbacks. It really, I mean, I think there were certain times I was sort of a perfectionist. Like, I didn't enjoy, obviously, not playing well, so, even when people, the audiences would clap a lot and I'd feel like I didn't quite do it right, I would be hard on myself. But that kind of made me go to the practice room and try to get better. I did have to learn not to dwell on things. When I made a mistake, for instance, when I was very young, I would if I'd make a mistake, I would cringe and grimace in front, and get down on myself, and even when most people wouldn't even know that I made a mistake, and and I learned that you have to move on and you have to let it go. You make a mistake and let it go. I mean, I entered competitions when I was younger where I didn't win and I lost, and I learned from those experiences.